Welcome back to the 14th edition of the Jaipur Literature Festival from here at Diggy Palace, protected by Dettol. Today's session is supported by British Council Wales. It's our pleasure to present The Jury's Out, the Swansea University Dylan Thomas Prize 2021. Namita Gokhale, Syima Aslam, Joshua Ferris, Francesca Riderche and Stephen Sexton in conversation with Elaine Canning. The Swansea University Dylan Thomas Prize is one of the most prestigious literary prizes in the world for young writers. Its 2021 jury, chaired by award-winning writer, publisher and JLF co-founder director Namita Gokhale, comprises critically acclaimed poet Stephen Sexton and novelist Joshua Ferris and Francesca Riderche, as well as Syima Aslam, founder and director of the Bradford Literature Festival, celebrated as the most socio-economically and ethnically diverse literary festival in the United Kingdom. In conversation with the prize's executive officer, Elaine Canning, the judges discuss their individual literary disciplines, the new literary landscape, and the significance of words in transcending borders and cultures. Namita Gokhale has written 20 books, including 11 works of fiction. Her recent novel, Jaipur Journals, was released in January 2020. Betrayed by Hope, a play on the tragic life of the poet Michael Madhusudan Dutt, was published in December 2020 and features in this edition of the Jaipur Literature Festival. She is the co-founder and co-director of the festival, and she is keenly involved in curating intra-literary dialogues across languages and cultures. Syima Aslam is the founder and director of the Bradford Literature Festival, BLF, a 10-day literary and cultural affair. BLF welcomes more than 70,000 visitors to Bradford annually and is celebrated as the most socio-economically and ethnically diverse literary festival in the United Kingdoms. Joshua Ferris is the best-selling author of 3 novels and a collection of short stories. The Dinner Party. He's been the winner of the Barnes & Noble Discover Award and the Penn Hemingway Award, shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize winner of the International Dylan Thomas Prize, and was named one of New Yorker's 20 under 40 writers in 2010. Francesca Riderche is a novelist and academic. Her debut novel, The Rice Paper Diaries, was longlisted for the Authors Club Best First Novel Award and won the Wales Book of the Year Fiction Prize. Her short stories have been published in anthologies and magazines and broadcast on Radio 4 and Radio Wales. She subsequently co-edited Serene Books' most recent fiction anthology, New Welsh Short Stories, with Penny Thomas, and has been Associate Professor in Creative Writing at Swansea University since 2015. Stephen Sexton's first book, If All the World and Love Were Young, was the winner of the Forward Prize for the Best First Collection in 2019 and the Shine Strong Award for the Best First Collection. He is the 2020 recipient of the E.M. Foster Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He was also the winner of the National Poetry Competition in 2016 and the recipient of an Eric Gregory Award in 2018. He teaches at the Syima Aslam Centre for Poetry at Queen's University, Belfast. Elaine Canning is a writer and the executive officer of Swansea University's Dylan Thomas Prize, author of a book and several papers on Spanish Golden Age drama. Canning has also published several short stories and is currently working on her first novel. Please do remember to comment by typing it into the comment section below. Ladies and gentlemen, the jury's out. The Swansea University Dylan Thomas Prize 2021. Namita Gokhale, Syima Aslam, Joshua Ferris, Francesca Riderche and Stephen Sexton in conversation with Elaine Canning.
Welcome everybody. It's an absolute joy to be here with you today, and thank you so much for joining us. We're delighted to have such an esteemed panel for our 2021 edition of the Swansea University Dylan Thomas Prize. And I'd like to begin by asking you all to say a few words about your literary disciplines. So Namita, if I come to you first as chair of the 2021 jury, you're of course an award-winning writer and publisher and co-founder and director of the Jaipur Literature Festival, this wonderful festival that we're part of today. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about the genesis of the Jaipur Literature Festival.
Well, it was an accident, as all good things are. I had helped organize something called the first International Literary Festival in India in Neemrana, which is in Rajasthan. And I had mentioned to a friend that we will do this thing in Jaipur. And somehow it happened that somebody wanted to do a small festival in Jaipur, which we did for 2 years. And then Teamwork Arts and Sanjoy Roy took over. William Dalrymple and I were there from the very beginning. And once Sanjoy joined, we became these 3 people who complemented each other quite well in the things we were doing. And we grew from a tiny single stage thing with audiences of 40, 50, 60 people in the first years, 80 people, sometimes 10 people, to, I don't know, I always get puzzled by the figures, but what is the largest literary festival in the world, they say. And now after this, we've become a very good literary platform on virtually, and we've made that transition. So that is the Jaipur Literature Festival. It's multilingual, it's diverse, and we try to keep it spontaneous.
And when did it actually start, Namita? How long have you been going now?
We take it as 2008. We had these 2 linked festivals earlier, but we began in 2008, the first JLF. And it's given me, as a writer, I have gained so much from it, of knowledge of other writers. I mostly help to publish in translation. That also I try to use the Jaipur Lit Fest as a platform. But I've learned so much from all the great writers I've encountered, and their discipline and their humility and their wonderful work. So that's like all I can say about myself. Except that I'm quite a bit of a busybody and delighted to be the chair of the Dylan Thomas Prize this year, because that's one prize I love to read for, because I read a lot of different voices, younger people, sort of books I may not easily encounter otherwise. And it's an absolute joy just after the festival to forget all these things and read and read and read.
Thank you so much. And it's a joy to have you as chair of our jury, Namita. And thank you so much for your very kind words about the prize. Syima, I'd like to come to you next, following on from Namita was saying about the genesis of JLF. So you're the founder and director of the Bradford Literature Festival, which was established in 2014. And it's hailed as a festival which is very much known as something which is innovative and inspirational and ethnically diverse. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about how and why the Bradford Literature Festival came about.
Firstly, thank you, Lynn. Really, really lovely to be here today and to take part in this panel and to be at JLF, which is such a shining beacon. So an absolute, it's on my wish list, the Jaipur Literature Festill.
When the world opens out.
Absolutely. So really lovely to be here today. In terms of Bradford, a little bit like as Namita was saying, these things are, I think, almost always an accident. I helped a friend, a good friend of mine, to run a very small film festival, which he had been talking about for quite a long time. And when I was thinking about that and thinking about the structure of that, out of that came the Literature Festival. I'm a bookworm, love books, I've grown up with books, and I wanted to create something to actually pass some of that love on. So Bradford is it's a city with people from around the world. It's an international city from that point of view. We've had successive waves of migration over the last couple of centuries. So it's a really rich melting pot. And I wanted to create something that would reflect that. So I have a really good friend in Qureshi, and I rang her up and I said, I have this really great idea. It's a brilliant idea, let's do this. And we spent quite a lot of time talking, initially with her saying to me, I don't know if it is a good idea, but we eventually both became really enthusiastic about it. And that was really where Bradford came from. And it was driven by a desire to reflect the city that it was rooted in. And we felt that given the really rich literary and heritage that Bradford has and the cultural diversity, if we created a festival that reflected that, it would automatically reflect the UK and be relevant to the rest of the world. And I think for me, the overriding passion was to create something that would be really accessible. And actually, I mean, I was really interested in the JLF model from that point of view, and the fact that, you know, people could just come. I think my experience was that when I was going to cultural events or literary events, it's a very particular audience that I was seeing engaging with those events. And I thought about myself at a young age, and I thought I would never have had this access. And I thought actually the people who need to be listening to some of these things that we are talking about are actually the people who probably will never think that this space is for them, or probably be able to afford it. So the festival is also driven by that desire to actually ensure that it takes the communities that it is rooted in alongside, and inspires communities and inspires young children. Because I look back and I remember how important reading was for me and how important libraries were. So all of those different things came together to create the Bradford Literature Festival.
Thank you, Syima. And the point about accessibility is absolutely critical, isn't it? You know, if we want people to engage with literature and so on, then we have to make it possible for them to do so. Joshua, I'd like to come to you next. As an author of 3 novels and a short story collection, which have been internationally acclaimed, and of course you were the winner of the Dylan Thomas Prize in 2014, which was Dylan Thomas's centenary year. I wondered if you could tell us about writing for you, how you get into writing, what themes and concepts within your writing are critical to you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's nice to see you again, Elaine. Has it really been it was 2014, so it's been it feels like yesterday, you know. It doesn't feel like that many years have passed.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I started writing when I was a kid, really. You know, I watched a lot of TV and thought, I knew that's where it began, with writing stories. So I read a lot of Alfred Hitchcock stories, and I read voraciously as a child. My parents read a lot to me. And at some point or another, I just probably got bored and was sitting around and decided to, you know, put pen to paper. And I wrote very, very, very bad parodies of these early stories that I was reading. I think one of them was based on the Alfred Hitchcock movie, The Birds, and I called it The Crabs. So I wasn't reaching very hard. I wasn't reaching very far. But I was totally engaged by storytelling and completely in love with the act of it. And I was mad about Mad Magazine, you know, the kind of irreverent, sly humor, and made my own, you know, with paper and paste and pencil and scissors. And it was only really 10 years later, I would say, when I was about 20 and in college, that I thought, maybe I could do this seriously. You know, I mean, the world of literature precedes you, and all of the writers that you admire precede you, and they all seem to be dead. And it doesn't seem to be a viable avenue for a living person, let alone yourself. And so I think a certain amount of daring and chutzpah has to be sort of brought to the fore before you can even think about doing it in any serious capacity. And so I would say still another 5 or 6 years passed before I felt deputized by the reading that I had been doing and the learning that I had done in college and all the rest of it, to really try very hard to write a novel. And I think that's, to some extent, probably very universal, and a testament to the extent of effort and encouragement that it takes young writers before they really venture out and believe it's even possible. You know, I had all of the benefits that anyone could have been given, including a totally wrecked childhood by my parents, you know, to be a novelist. And yet it still took an enormous amount of years and encouragement to get there. So in any event, I have written 3 novels and a collection of short stories. I finished a 4th just a few months ago. And so that will be published soon. And I enjoy the hell out of it.
Fantastic, and congratulations. We look forward to seeing your next work. When is it due to be published, Josh, do you know?
Here in the States in September. I think in the UK around the same time.
Well, a lot of what Josh has said did chime with me, definitely. I love the way you described it, almost as kind of there'd be one movement towards writing a novel, and then you'd wait a while, and then there'd be another wave that carried you closer, and then in the end you were carried off on this wave and completed it. And I think it was, yeah, definitely for me a similar experience, in that I, like many writers, loved writing when I was small. I think the interesting thing is that you can look back on yourself as a child and think, I wrote without even thinking about it. So there's no self-consciousness there. You're not even thinking about publishing or what that actually means. You're just thinking about the words and the way that you see the world. And I suppose I've tried to retain a little bit of that as I've gone through the beginnings of a career as a writer myself. I think for a long time I felt that writing was for other people, publishing was for other people, not necessarily for me. Even when I started to work in publishing myself, working for the little magazines and then became the editor of a magazine myself, I still felt that writing, publishing was this magic thing that other people would manage to do and not necessarily me. And then it was only really when I came across a story, a family story that became the basis for my first novel, The Rice Paper Diaries, that I felt that I really had something to say, and that it might be possible to write a book that could be different from other books because it was unique to me. And I suppose that's not so much being given a kind of confidence, but it definitely gave me the belief that it was worth devoting myself to this novel to see if I could actually finish it. And it was a wonderful experience, and I was so glad that I did it. And then I turned to writing short stories. So now I'm writing both. And discovering what a different form from the novel the short story is, that's been something of a journey as well. And creating these little miniature worlds. And it's been, I've been very fortunate in that I've been really supported by the literary culture in Wales particularly. We have a really rich literary culture here in both languages, which really supports writers at all stages in their careers. There's a really lively readership, really intelligent, questioning audience. And even though I like to think of Wales as a culture that looks out to the world, it's wonderful having that reading culture here at home as well. So I feel that I've really benefited from that and have been very lucky.
Thank you, Fran. And of course, your wonderful novel, The Rice Paper Diaries, went on to win the Wales Book of the Year Fiction Prize. And like Josh, you move between the novel and short stories, so you're working on prose across various genres. I'd like to come to Stephen. I'd like to come to you now. I think what Fran was saying about the culture and the reading culture and literary culture in Wales is very much part and parcel of the culture in Ireland as well. And your debut collection, If All the World and Love Were Young, has had tremendous critical acclaim. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that collection itself and about your poetry more broadly, because it's really interesting in terms of the style of your work and the innovation behind it and how you work with poetry and images. I wondered if you could talk us through that a little bit.
Gladly. And Elaine, thank you. It's so lovely to speak with you all. And it's so interesting to hear these stories. There are things that I don't really hear so often, but they all resonate in strange ways. And as Namita was saying, that good things might come from accidents. Part of me doesn't really want to understand how I came about composing anything, as if by knowing it would vanish. So that seems to be how I proceed, is by having a little bit of an idea and going into the unknown. But yeah, that book, I guess, was a little, mischievous is how I kind of think about it. I mean, one of the forces that motivates me the most, I guess, is kind of this sort of thing, is thinking about images. That's what really kind of thrills me. And, I think of my life in some ways, like many people, as kind of being maybe not exactly bisected, but, I remember my life before the internet happened, and I remember my life after it. And I guess I've been really interested in how we deal with images, how this kind of image is different than, the painted image or the poetic image or whatever. And since we kind of communicate through images, the image is arguably I don't know, a more efficient mode of communication than language is. I'm just kind of thrilled by this. But that book, If All the World and Love Were Young, is a book that I started as a kind of joke. I started in a mischievous mood thinking, what if I were to look at a video game? What if I were to look specifically at Super Mario and imagine that as a real kind of landscape? A real one that a person, an eye, an imagination, a consciousness is moving through. What would that be like? So I set about, writing what I think of as little digital pastoral poems. How is this landscape, this digital one, like the real world? What is it like to look out, as all of us have been doing since March last year, to see the world through a screen, through a window, to see things happening with this crucial distance from it. So I started writing all these poems about Super Mario World because I thought it would be a joke. I thought, why not, take this grand tradition of poetry and image and painting, and why not do it with a video game? But as one proceeds with accidents, as one proceeds into the unknown, I ended up not really writing a book about Super Mario World. I ended up writing a book about my mother's death and trying to understand childhood, trying to understand memory, trying to understand how you can kind of be in two places at once, how grief makes the world a very strange place, and how, you move through this fantastical world trying to get back out of it again. So I ended up, thinking about images. That's what really kind of thrills me, is trying to understand the digital image, the poetic image, the world and how we look at it.
Fascinating. It's an absolutely fascinating collection, Stephen. And I know we've talked about it before, but I think also, what we're moving into is, these sort of more hybrid forms, and thinking about the fluidity that we're getting within different styles of writing, which I'd like to come back to. But I'd like to go to Syima, if I may, at this stage, because for writers, literary festivals are incredibly important. It's a way of being able to, it's a platform for your work, it's a platform for various voices. And I just wondered, from your perspective, when it comes to programming a highly successful, high-profile literature festival like Bradford, where on earth do you start in terms of your programming and thinking about your audiences and thinking about your speakers and themes and so on, and of course profiling underrepresented voices? What's the process? How do you make all that magic happen?
I think it's an interesting process. It's a little bit like having a big cauldron and running around it. And throwing lots of things in, and seeing what emerges. I think because of the nature of the festival, and because there are certain things which are really, really important to us, we obviously start with looking at the books that are coming out, and who's writing what and what do we want to be talking about. But also we are quite an issues-led festival as well. We try to make sure that we are creating a space where conversations that might be deemed difficult in other spaces can take place. So that's, I suppose, another factor that comes in because of the communities that we have within Bradford. And like I said, the thing that is always really interesting to me is that actually when you start looking at Bradford and all of those different populations, it sort of becomes this microcosm of the UK, and it allows us to create some really, really international connections. So we look at what is important to the people within the communities and what they are talking about at the moment, and what do they want to talk about, what do they want to hear about, what are the international connections that we can make and bring in that will be really, really pertinent to them. So it's actually all of those different things. And I know inclusivity and representation is obviously, it's become a really hot topic over I think particularly over the last year. I suppose where I've always started from, and a lot of that is to do with my heritage and the way I've grown up, is it's about a parity of voice, treating all of our writers, regardless of background, as having an equality of voice. Because I think what can happen at times is there is a predominance of a certain type of voice, and everything else is it's hooked on because we want to be we want to show that we are inclusive and that we are doing the right thing. So we create this sort of here's the centerpiece. Now we're going to just add these things in just to flavour it slightly. And I think the difference with Bradford is that isn't where we come from. I think if you actually look at programming and just think about having the best people to talk about a certain topic, the best writers, regardless of, ticking boxes or whatever it may be, you actually end up very naturally with something that is quite inclusive and quite diverse.
Yeah. And how far in advance are you normally planning, Syima?
Well, I have these boards which are kind of stretching into the distance. I feel like I'm a complete sieve, so this is part of the reason. So anything that I have an idea, I'll jot it down into, and sometimes it's in 2030, which is, but the boards are there and the things get logged in, and of course sometimes you sort of get there 2 years later and you say, okay, well it seemed like a really bright idea at the time.
So you're constantly thinking about it and creating, and it's just an ongoing process, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think with curating festivals, it's you live and breathe it. It's very much. I don't think I realised that when I actually started running the festival. I had no idea just how all-consuming it would be. But I was saying to somebody actually just yesterday, I said I'm very, very lucky because my passion is now my work. And that's an amazing position to be in. Yeah.
Can I ask how many people then help you? How many are organizing? How big is your staff?
So now, well, initially there were 2 of us. And the first festival that we ran in 2014 was tiny. It was about 25 events. 2015 was the first 10-day festival. And there was myself and Edna. We had 2 interns and a handful of volunteers. And I look back at it now and I think, flying by the seat of our pants or what? Now I have a team. Of there are 8 of us all together.
Wow.
And then obviously when the festival is happening, we sort of expand hugely and then suddenly contract again. And for a couple of weeks, it's a little bit like where's everybody gone? But yeah.
It's so interesting. I think a lot of what you say also, Namita, I know you live and breathe JLF. I know it's very much an issues-led festival. Would you like to say a little bit about the background to that? Because I know you're involved in programming very heavily, and I know a lot of the strategic direction in that comes from you. So are Syima's experiences comparable to yours?
I have a co-director in William Dalrymple, and it helps a lot because the 2 of us have some interest that interlap. But most of our interests are different. He understands art, music, history, so many things which, I do, but my passions are the Indian languages, non-English representation, literature, poetry, so many things where we overlap, so many places where each of us has particular strengths and particular ways of looking at these things. And we do argue, but all our arguments lead to better programming. And in fact, we've even stopped arguing now. We are like a married couple, very functional thing where, the other one says, okay, let this one go. But we really help each other. And the festival, I don't think either William nor me could have done the festival without the other. It is an all-consuming thing, and it has taken over my life and made me a better person, I'd say.
Oh, it is. It's wonderful to hear you and Syima talking about growing something, within a relatively short space of time and turning these into phenomenally successful international festivals. It's absolutely wonderful. Stephen, you've been to Jaipur. You were out there last year. I think one of the things that both of these festivals do also is it's showcasing new writers too, and new writing. And I wanted to touch a little bit on these new writing and new trends, I suppose, in the literary landscape. And I just wondered, from your perspective, Stephen, as a poet, are you seeing the emergence of more sort of hybrid styles of writing within poetry? What's your view on that?
I am seeing some of that. I mean, I wish I could be more well read. I suppose that's something that might be a common feeling. Although it's a marvelous thing to get to read so many books. I mean, I feel as though there are trends, but I'm also inclined to be aware, of my own limitations and the other limitations that there are in publishing. And I think it's something that came to me rather late. But writing and publishing are very different things. I guess it's worth remembering. So I wonder if what I might perceive as a new trend might just be that, the world has shifted in a way that shows it, that it's not perhaps a trend, but something that's been written for some time that, certain machinations now make it visible. I wonder about that. But I think it is safe to say that there's a much greater attention given to the environment, let's say, to natural landscapes, as there ought to be. I noticed over the last couple of years particular attention to that, and particular attention to the world that we're living in. When it comes to hybrid texts, I think there is. I mean, there are a lot of. I think we can look, for example, at the long list that we have for the prize to see how certain tendencies are coming across. There's a tendency for the lyric poem, whatever we mean by that, is changing quite a lot. We see less and less of what we would call traditional lyric poems that I would certainly see in Ireland, or we would see in the UK, or even in the US too. That lyric poem isn't really working anymore, it seems, and it has its problems. I mean, its history, its legacy of the lyric poem tends to mean a certain kind of thing, and by extension tends to exclude a great number of people. So it's only correct, I feel, that what we mean by the lyric poem, what we mean by I, should be thought about more deeply. And I think, the poem's tendency towards narrative is something that's developing in a modern iteration. More rapidly is what I'm tending to see. So that collapse of the lyric and the tendency towards the narrative are certainly things I'm seeing formally. In terms of subject, in terms of content, I wonder if they're new. I wonder if we're just getting better at seeing them.
I always feel that, voices can be very, very powerful on the page. That doesn't mean that they have to be loud or brash. They can be really quiet and powerful, and that doesn't necessarily relate to age. But there's certainly more than a willingness to be on the page, but a real desire to put their marker down as authors and to say something about the world and their place in it. And that's something that I really enjoy and get so much from as a writer and a reader myself. People sometimes say, oh, the novel is, it's coming to its natural end. It can't stay as it is. But I think what fascinates me about both novels and short stories is that as forms, they're constantly reinventing themselves. And actually up against this notion of, what's relevant, what are people talking about, what are people writing about? You have, on the other hand, the timelessness of the craft of writing. And I suppose that's one of the things that's most exciting to me this year, reading the books for this prize, is that you have that sense of timelessness there with that real oomph of the kind of strong, young, powerful voices on the page. And together they're just incredibly strong. And it's an absolute pleasure to be reading them.
Well, I think writers are always, eager to move the form forward, and then there's inevitably the limitations that any one writer has in that regard. It's very hard to take a form that's been around for so long and add something new to it. So, typically the way I think most writers end up pursuing the craft is kind of falling back into those conservative ways and means of communicating a point or a theme or a character. And so inevitably there's a push-pull. I mean, of late, making headlines are things like autofiction and novels that eschew any kind of real extravagant imagination for more autobiographical, truthful lines of thought that thinly veil identity and connections. And I think that that might look a little different from what we used to call the autobiographical novel, in that there isn't quite as much dramatic hay being made in the imagination and more reliance upon the autobiographical event. Mm-hmm. So I think that is a strain that wants to tap into a desire for fact and for quote unquote reality, for something that looks a little bit more like reportage and biography, something that oddly, in a moment when reality becomes more fractured than ever, mm-hmm. provides the comfort that said this happened, this is true. And so I think the novel has sort of gone in that direction, but I also think, to Fran's point, that it has exploded in terms of what story has been made available, the diversity of story that has been made available over the course of the last, certainly in the US, over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, which might coincide with certain historical events that are of moment. But, I took it upon myself quixotically, because I'm nowhere near done with this, of reading all of the best American short stories, which is a collection, an anthology that comes out annually, and has been coming out annually, I think, since like 1918 or something like that. I mean, it goes back over 100 years. But in 1978, the person that sort of curated all of those stories died, and they introduced a new format, and they would have guest editors. And so in 78 was the first guest editor. So I'm starting in 78 and trying to go through the current day. And I realize as I go through them, and I don't read them in order. Let's see if I have one around here. Here's one from 81. And it was edited by a woman named Hortense Kalischer, who at the time was a big novelist, but I've never heard of her until I picked up this book. It's shocking how many, of the contributors would look like me, right? They were white dudes. And I want to say most of them are white dudes. Interestingly, almost every one of these has an Alice Munro story in it, and they're almost exclusively the best of the stories. Alice Munro seemed to have written all the best stories. But it really changes as you track it from 78 to 2020, the diversity of story on display. So I think that is an indisputable change that has nothing to do with form itself. The form, I think, is always going to remain relatively conservative.
There's so many more things I want to ask you, but I'm conscious that we are beginning to run out of time. So I've got 2 questions that I'd like to put to all of you. The first is for new writers who are starting out, who've just been published. It might be, a poem in a magazine or a short story that's been awarded a prize, for example. What sort of advice would you give to them in terms of sharing their voices or making their voices heard?
I would say take yourself seriously, not too seriously, but take yourself seriously and try to get to your desk every day if you can. I know from experience a lot of things have to happen right in order for you to get there. But those are the 2 things I think that can carry you a long, long way. Thank you.
Josh?
I think it can be pretty lonely, and so I think what you have to do, Fran's point is the most important. You have to get to the desk. You have to work. You have to put in the effort, because otherwise it won't happen. Unless you're a genius, and then you don't have any worries here. We're not talking to you because you're taken care of. But you have to get to the desk. But I also think that it can be very, if you've gotten a poem or a story published, then it's very encouraging. It's very addictive too. You want more of it. You want to see yourself in print. You want to write more stories that are good enough to get into print. You want to see yourself take off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Surround yourself by people who encourage that. Surround yourself with the people who are nurturing of your talent. And anyone that is naysaying of it or discouraging of it, anyone like a parent figure or a boss or even an educator who is persuading you to go to law school rather than pursue literature, do away with, curtain them off. and find those who believe in you and who can encourage you when the times get dark, because they will inevitably. You know, the flush of first print will go away, and then you're stuck with yourself going to the desk as you must and finding that it's not very good. And so you've got to find those people who will encourage you through the dark times.
Yeah, I think that nurturing and surrounding yourself with the right people is absolutely crucial. Stephen, do you agree with that? Do you agree with Joyce and Fran on that routine of writing?
Entirely. I wish I could add something else necessarily. I mean, it's incredible that inspiration, whatever that is, strikes when you're already working, isn't it? Like it seldom hits you when you're elsewhere. You kind of have to be sitting there working for it to come. I think so, and I absolutely agree with the idea of a community. That's been so important to me. I mean, it's one of the things that we miss so much, that isn't quite the same, is being in that community of people, hearing work, for example, or just talking to each other. I mean, being in the same room as people is something that we miss. But yes, I think absolutely working. I mean, I don't know if it's useful. I think a certain degree of very, very serious modesty is useful. Sometimes, I mean, I'm someone who writes poems. But, that's it. I don't write poetry. I'm not a poet. I'm somebody who writes poems because that seems, I should approach it carefully. The same way if I'm, trying to do a crossword, I use a pencil. I'm not certain of anything.
Yeah, always use a pencil. I love that. I think what you were saying too about community is so crucial, obviously, to what Syima and Namita are doing and the opportunities that they're giving to writers through the festivals. So, Syima, in terms of what we're going through at the moment, why is it more important than ever, do you think, that we need works of literature and we need literature festivals and we need to be having these intercultural exchanges and discussions?
I think we've been living through really interesting times, and we still are. I found it interesting in the last sort of 7 years since I've set the festival up, just how much more polarized the world has become. And I think against that background, it is really important that we actually have these events that actually bring people together. I think literature is one of the greatest ways of seeing the world from a different point of view, of having that empathy and developing that empathy and just, moving into different worlds and spaces that you wouldn't actually otherwise be able to do so. And I think if there is anything that we can, in terms of what's been happening politically across the globe, and then, of course, the pandemic as well, these things really bring us together, they link us. It's been lovely to see, actually, that during the pandemic, despite the pandemic, the sales going up for books. And bookshops doing really well, and people turning to these things as a source of comfort. And I think it's those things that develop that common human connection between us. And I am so looking forward to when we can actually get back together in person again. And I think the Zooms have been lovely, and I think it's been great to have all of these connections. But actually, there is something that festivals do in terms of bringing people together from around the world, and those conversations that happen, and that chance. Those chance encounters that we can't quite do by Zoom, but they are really, really important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's wonderful and lovely that we're all here together across different parts of the world, and we're able to be here today as part of the wonderful Jaipur Literature Festival. But it will just be even more wonderful when we're all able to be together again in person. Namita, I'm going to hand over to you for the last words as chair of our jury and as co-director and founder of the festival. What would you like to say in terms of the importance of these dialogues and exchanges we're having in literature in these challenging times?
Let me talk about my personal experience over the last 2 times I was on the jury. There were wonderful books that won the prizes in those 2 years, but there were 4 books, and I won't mention them all, but they have stayed with me and influenced my writing, and I've read them carefully. And I must say that one of the people on the jury this year is one of those whose book, Stephen's book, influenced me deeply with its playful, tragic tone. But there were 3 other writers who really stayed with me over these years. And that emphasizes once again that the diversity of the catchment, it's really a voyage of discovery to know who among younger writers anywhere is writing, whether it is theatre, plays, poetry, fiction. I've written a play this year, and I did benefit from reading so many plays in the last few years. And also, one thing I would like to emphasize, both as the JLF director and just as a person who is bilingual, is that, of course, we have a Welsh prize here, but in the end, we are all talking across our diversity of experiences in English. I come from India, and we have 21 national languages. This year, we've created a string of sessions and readings across these 21 languages. And so to go back to your earlier question, to some of the others about how do people survive in such an environment, I want to say that it is for me the greatest pride as being Indian to realize that all these 21 languages, or at least 18 of them or something, are flourishing in the literary field. Many of them are very ancient languages. Many of them are comparatively younger languages. Very few people realize that Bangla, the language of Bangladesh and India, has more readers, writers, speakers than French. So, but they are two worlds out there, the world of English and the rest of the world. It's really an honor and a privilege, and very exciting to be working with this prize. And I am really so happy that all the jury got to talk to each other, though I'm sure we can argue and talk some more when we do finally meet on the books. And thank you again, all of you, for so many things, for being writers, for being festival directors, for encouraging literature, keeping the books going and the stories going and the arguments going. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Namita. What a beautiful and positive note to end on. I wish we had more time, but sadly we are out of time. I just wanted to say a huge thank you to all of you for joining us today, for sharing your experience and for sharing your thoughts so generously. It's just wonderful to be with you, and I can't wait to talk more with you over the coming months about our prize. To everyone joining us today, thank you also. Thank you to our session partner, British Council Wales, and to the Dylan Thomas Trust for all their support. The shortlist for the Swansea University Dylan Thomas Prize will be announced on the 25th of March, followed by the winner announcement on the 13th of May, which is the eve of International Dylan Thomas Day. So it seems only right that we now end with Dylan Thomas's own words, and performing Do Not Go Gentle into That Good Night. Here is internationally acclaimed Welsh actor, patron of the Dylan Thomas Prize and honorary fellow of Swansea University, Michael Sheen. Thank you, everybody.
Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. The wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight, and learned too late they grieved it on its way, do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death, who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light.
Thank you, Namita Gokhale, Syima Aslam, Joshua Ferris, Francesca Riderche, Stephen Sexton, and Elaine Canning for such a brilliant conversation, and more power to the Dylan Thomas Prize. And we hope to have you back in 2022 in person right here at Diggy Palace. We thank British Council Wales for supporting the session and our celebration partner, Diageo. Thank you all for watching and being such a great audience. Please remember to stay logged on, and of course, you can wander off and visit the front lawn, or you can go to the Darbar Hall, or go off and buy a book, or visit Earth Fables, our craft stall. As you're aware, the cultural sector has been critically impacted by the pandemic, and all of us have really struggled to stay afloat and stay alive and continue to fight for the free flow of knowledge and ideas. Please consider contributing to Teamwork Arts. Please do tweet using the hashtag Jaipur Literature Festival 2021, and our handles are at Jaipur Lit Fest. Festival is protected by Dettol. Stay safe, stay masked. See you soon.